Nietzsche tells us that man must live dangerously. Greetings from Valdez, where I've gone on a ski trip, but today the winds are a bit too high for us to fly, so decided to come back and read one of my favorite aphorisms of Nietzsche that is particularly relevant to this trip. It's on the necessity of living dangerously. So this is aphorism 283 in the Gay Science, and this is how Nietzsche ends it. The secret for harvesting from existence the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius, send your ships into uncharted seas, live at war with your peers and yourselves. Now, what Nietzsche had in mind here, obviously, has a component of physical danger, but physical danger is not what really Nietzsche wants to get at here. What physical danger is preparation for danger that's all the more important to him, and that's intellectual, creative danger, willing to be a free spirit, willing to establish one's own values. In other words, what Nietzsche is really worried about, his advice to live dangerously, is actually a warning against becoming the last man. The last man is someone, for Nietzsche, who does not live dangerously, physically or intellectually. He's timid in body and soul. He prizes tolerance, moderation. What he wants is just lowly ease and happiness and to live a pleasurable and comfortable life. It is a modern man, essentially. That's who Nietzsche is warning us against. And so in this video, I thought I'd traced out the intellectual development of how the last man came to be. Now, there's one strand, clearly, that comes from Christianity, which I've talked about in my lecture on the genealogy. You're welcome to watch that. But I want to emphasize a different strand that gave birth to the last man, that starts from Machiavelli and that culminates in the American project. And you might be surprised that Machiavelli is, I would suggest, the thinker that engendered the last man. Because prima facie, there's many aspects in Machiavelli's thought that seems to really align with Nietzsche's, right? Not the least of which is his emphasis on power as the true logic of political social interaction, but also his anti-Christian, anti-otherworldly instincts. And of course, like Nietzsche, he elevates danger. He praises certain kinds of war. For Machiavelli, violence, whether that's foreign, whether that's domestic class conflict, whether that's just personal, living close and personal with what he calls necessity, is a pedagogical tool. It keeps you sober, and people who live in ease and comfort for too long become soft and effeminate. Those are Machiavelli's words and how he would describe the negative consequences. So prima facie, again, he seems to agree with Nietzsche, and it seems odd to suggest that the last man comes from Machiavelli. But beneath the surface, there is a latent view of human nature that Machiavelli introduces that eventually becomes fully developed in the last man. And that is that Machiavelli has a very low conception of human nature. Here's what I mean. I'll tease it out with a question. Why does Machiavelli praise the great man, the great founder? A great part of the reason is because it's justified on how he protects the many, right? How he establishes the state. So the great man is justified by the survival of the state that he alone is able to offer. But Machiavelli tells us the one founds, the great man founds, and the many maintain, okay? So in other words, there is a time for great men, and they are certainly valuable, but they're not the ultimate value. There's a time also for the bureaucrats and for committees as well. But now let's ask that question to Nietzsche. Why does Nietzsche value the great man, the higher man, the creative genius. It's not the many. He's not justified by, let's say, the aesthetic pleasure that he brings to the population. It's the reverse. The many are justified by the great man. Nietzsche has this image, I can't remember which book it is, where the great man is the fruit and civilization is the tree branch. Everything is, an entire civilization is justified if they can produce one Goethe, right? That's the kind of intuition. In other words, the reasons that they praise danger, that they denounce Christianity, that they emphasize power is radically different. For Nietzsche, he wants to elevate man even further. He wants to engender these rare higher types. But for Machiavelli, he is kind of happy with a brute kind of preservation on the self level and on the social level as well. So if you were to ask Machiavelli what his ideal state is, right, and what his ideal man is, it's very different from Nietzsche's, right? It's not these creative types, these free spirits. It's that we survive. Okay, there are other things. Okay, there's a modicum of freedom so that we're not oppressed. There is ability to do your trade well, sometimes he says, and there's glory. That's also a big part in Machiavelli. But the majority of the ink in Machiavelli is spelt on pure survival. And latent within that is a lower conception of man. It's not Christianity with the soul in the afterlife. It's not Aristotle who develops man's faculties to their end, to their telos, right, and elevates man in a different way. He treats man essentially as an animal. And it is this intuition that is developed by thinkers like Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu, that eventually fully blossoms into the last man and becomes spread in modernity through the success of the American founding, okay? So what Hobbes, Locke, and Montesquieu do is they absorb this low conception of man, right? We're no longer in the Christian era, we're no longer in the classical era. The state is not to make us virtuous, it's just to protect our basic rights and self-preservation. But what these three thinkers do is that they remove a lot of the elements that Nietzsche would have liked in Machiavelli. Okay, so one example is that Machiavelli's brute self-interest is not really moralized in any way. It's just necessity, right? It's supra-moral. But these thinkers, I'm thinking especially about Locke and Hobbes, turn this kind of brute self-interest, this natural need for preservation, into natural rights, right? In other words, they turn Machiavelli's attack on morality into its own standard of morality, which is the natural right tradition, which is responsible for things like human rights. Now, another thing that these thinkers take away from Machiavelli that Nietzsche would like is war, is Machiavelli's emphasis on violence. And this is most clear in Montesquieu and Locke. They replace war with commerce, okay? So in Machiavelli, the famous story is his praise of Cincinnatus, which is this Roman general who lives as a poor sustenance farmer. And the reason he's able to do so is that his glory, his ambition has already been fulfilled as a great military leader. Okay, so you don't need to be a billionaire. You don't need to have all this flashy luxuries if you're as a man have proven yourself on the battlefield. So the hope in Machiavelli is that constant war or the opportunities for war will not make men want to enter into commerce. And thus, because he thinks that commerce is corrupting, it makes men soft and effeminate, it brings in luxuries. Montesquieu at least flips this on his head. He hopes, as we moderns hope, that by providing a channel of glory through commerce, men no longer want to fight wars, right? And so, in other words, these kind of intermediary thinkers who develop Machiavelli, they take this kind of low conception of human nature, like that somehow self-preservation is at least the core end of the state, and then they take away a lot of the things about Machiavelli that Nietzsche would have liked. And these are the thinkers that are responsible for intellectually grounding the American founding. And America is what is responsible for turning these from mere intellectual ideas into the modern values that we all, most people in the world, share today. And so if you look at the American founding, the first thing you'll be surprised by is just, again, how much commerce is emphasized. okay, as central to the state. And it's especially surprising when you contrast that against the ancient writers, whether it's Plato or it's Confucius. It's not an East-West thing, it's an ancient modern thing. These ancient thinkers all diminished commerce, and especially the commercial class, as lowly, right, as not worthy of grounding a state. Whereas the American founders not only viewed commerce as something that made us physically wealthy, that solved our physical needs, but gave us the right moral habits. For example, hard work, honesty, and this totally seeped into our educational system, right? And so this is what Jefferson wrote about education. A great obstacle to good education is the inordinate passion prevalent for novels and the time lost in that reading. When this poison infects the mind, it destroys its tone, reason and fact, plain and unadorned, are rejected. The result is a bloated imagination, sickly judgment, and disgust towards all the real businesses of life, commerce, and political activity too. This mass of trash, Jefferson's word, however, is not without some distinction. For like reason too, much poetry should not be indulged. Drawing is thought less of in this country than in Europe. It is an innocent and engaging amusement, often useful. Education, for the American founders, at least in this Jefferson quote, is no longer about Plato, Aristotle elevating the soul to what it could be. It certainly isn't Nietzsche who's trying to engender the Übermensch, but it's about use. It's about what justifies and is validated in commercial activity. So here's a very clear example. Both Plato and American founders suggest the study of math, but the reason could not be more different. The American founders want you to study math because you can be good at accounting, okay? You can run your own business. But for Plato, this is apocryphal, but written on the gates of his academy, let he who does not know geometry not enter. The reason to study math for Plato has nothing to do with commercial activity. It's to prepare your soul to better do philosophy when you're ready, okay? And so what I'm trying to get at is by absorbing this entire tradition that was spawned from Machiavelli, the American founders took the low conception of man and built an entire state around that idea, grounded on commerce, and given the success and influence of that state, spread those ideals across the world. And I think if you want to know why that is a problem for Nietzsche, look at how toleration is another value that comes out of this last man, lower human self-conception, emphasis on self-preservation. Toleration is one of the key values that comes out of this. And I just interviewed Tom Pangle, who's an East Coast Straussian, and his Straussian reading of Jefferson advocating for religious toleration is not so that we can wholeheartedly devote ourselves to the other world, to God, but it's to weaken religion, not by directly attacking it, but by making you stop caring about it. And I think any observer of America would be hard-pressed to argue anything other than the fact that this toleration over the last few centuries has diminished the piety of Americans. In other words, the American is forced to say, on one hand, I follow the true God, but on the other hand, I respect your religion, right? Not just I tolerate your religion these days, but I respect your belief, even if it's directly contradictory with my belief. And this is, I think, Nietzsche's greatest fear, is when you aren't willing to put you and maybe others as well in danger for your ideas. And now we're back in the gay science. This is how he begins aphorism 283. I greet all the signs indicating that a more manly and warlike age is commencing, which will above all bring heroism again into honor. This is the physical danger part, but it's just in preparation, for it has to prepare the way for a yet higher age and gather the force which the latter will one day require, the age which will carry heroism into knowledge and wage war for the sake of ideas and their consequences. Now, what's behind the background of a lot of this is the 30 Years' War, where various Christian sects fought over what to our eyes are minute theological distinctions. It is because of the terrifying consequences of this war and the seeming pointlessness that Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu, especially the American founders, wanted toleration. Now, I'm not saying that Nietzsche would praised the 30 Years' War, but that they at least got one thing right, which is that they believed in their ideas so much that they were willing to put themselves in danger for it. And while Nietzsche would not have, I think, affirmed the 30 Years' War for his critique on Christianity and all that stuff, I think he certainly would warn against our current state, where we are no longer willing to put our base self-interest, our self-preservation, our happiness, and our ease at great risk, at great danger, in order to pursue ideas.